All of these chord progressions will be either in the C major scale or the C minor scale. Basically what happens is each degree of the scale is broken up into a number, being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, or 1 because it's the octave. And you can use any of these scale degrees to make a power chord and move around in your chord progression. So as I number off which one is which, just know that that's the number that it's corresponding to is the scale degree. So one more time. The Blink-182 progression or the axis progression. This progression is basically one of the most used chord progressions in modern pop and rock music. I call it the Blink-182 progression because they use it in a lot of their songs, but it's very commonly used by many, many musicians in many, many songs. It basically breaks down to being a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression. So in this example, you have the C, then the G, then the A, and then the F. It's a very simple chord progression. It's really easy to write melodies on top of this because it's just basically the strongest building blocks of the C major scale, which means that you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. I would suggest this is a great place to start if you're looking to start writing songs and don't really have a lot of experience with chord progressions. The doo-wop progression. Before we had the axis progression, we had the doo-wop progression, which came into popularity in the 50s and 60s. Basically, this progression ends on a bit of a stronger note. 5 is a more stable note. 1 is the most stable note. 4 is less stable. When you try to resolve from 5 to 1, 5 is more stable, so the resolution doesn't give you as much of a feeling of completion as, say, 4 to 1 does, because 4 is more unstable than 5, so revolving from 4 to 1 is a better feeling resolution than, say, 5 to 1, because 5, you're comfortable on 5. You could probably stay on 5 and it would be okay. Is a less powerful resolution than from your 4 to your 1. You can hear this in a lot of popular music from the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. This is a 1, 6, 4, 5 chord progression. So basically you have the C, which is your 1, then you have the A, which is your 6, and then you have the F, which is your 4, and then you end on the G, which is your 5. This is definitely a chord progression to use if you're going for a bit more of a vintage kind of feel to your song. Green Day progression number 1. This chord progression is actually a chromatic chord progression, which means that it's not in the major or the minor scale because it uses all of the notes in C. Because of this, I can't give you the exact note numbers that's being used, but I can give you the notes that are being used. So we start with C, then we go down to B flat, then we go down to A, then we go down to A flat, and then G. So basically this is just a falling chromatic scale that allows you to move downward kind of forever and then landing back up at the C. This is good for anybody that wants to try something a little more exciting, but will probably definitely sound exactly like a Green Day song no matter what you do if you try to use this one. Green Day 2. This chord progression is a 1, 4, 7, 1 progression. You basically go from your C to your F to your B flat and then back up to C. The B flat is the 7 in this example, which is a note that very much wants to resolve back to the 1 because it's incredibly unstable. See, it really is an unstable note, which is why it brings you back to home, which is it was an interesting progression that you can use. This is kind of the American Idiot chord progression. Yeah, they use it a lot on that album, and I think it's a very interesting chord progression that I don't hear as much as could be used. The Ramones Progression. This progression is in C major, and it is a 1-4-5 progression. Basically, you're going from C, then you're going down to the F, and then up to your G for the 5th. You will hold on the 1 a little bit longer than you normally would, but it's still just a 3-chord progression. You can hear this all over the Ramones music. It sounds exactly like a Ramones song as soon as you start doing it. This chord progression is very powerful. Unlike the axis progression, it does resolve on the 5, so the resolution is a little less satisfying, but it is a progression that you can use if you're looking for a bit more of a 80s punk kind of vibe. The Descendants Progression. This progression is a 1-6-5 progression. I call it the Descendants riff because they use it a couple times in some of their songs. The Descendants were pretty cool about using a lot of different chord progressions. They didn't rely too heavily on one thing in a song, but I think that it kind of has that vibe to it. It's fun to use use a minor chord progression in this case, where you see the 6 down to the 5 to the 1. This is an interesting chord progression if you're writing a song in minor, which is, the sad, depressed scale, which is useful, and a little dark, a little edgy. If your punk's a little dark and edgy, this might be the one for you. The Stooges Progression. This progression is in C minor, and it is a 3-2-1 progression. You're basically starting on the 3rd scale degree and moving down to the octave. Basically, you have your 3rd, which is a E flat, down to a D, and then back down to your C. This is basically the I Want to Be Your Dog progression. That the whole song is just that, looped over and over and over again, and it's cool because when you go up to the 3rd wants to resolve, and it wants to fall back down to the 1, and throwing in the 2 there just creates even more tension and more uncertainty that makes you want to resolve back down to that 1. It's a really cool progression if you're trying to create kind of a very cyclical, circular kind of progression that's always going to lead you back down to the 1 no matter what you do, so you can never really get away from it. The Misfits Progression. This is a progression in C minor. It is a 1-6-7-1 progression. You start on your C, then you go to your A flat, then you go to your B flat, and then back up to your C. This can be seen in several Misfits songs. It's something that they relied on very heavily, along with the doo-wop progression. They used that one a lot as well in a bunch of their early music. It has a lot of uncertainty to it because you're relying on notes that have a lot of tension and are not very strong notes. They want to resolve. So you get yourself back up to that C pretty easily. It's very similar to the 3-2-1 progression in that the 6 and the 7 really want to resolve up to the 1. The Rancid Progression. This progression is in C major, and it is a 1-3-4-1 progression. You have your C, which is your 1st. Then you have an F flat. Then you have an F, resolving back down to C. Like many of the progressions in this list, the 3 is very unstable, and the closest stable note is 4, which, as we've learned, is still relatively unstable and is a very satisfying resolution back down to the 1. So this is a great progression if you want to do something that's a little different than the axis progression, but still has that same kind of satisfying resolution of the 4 to 1. And finally, Ballroom Blitz. This progression is in C minor and is the exact same as the Rancid progression, except that it's in minor, and it is a 1-3-4-1 progression. You have your C, an E flat, up to your F, and then back down to your C. This progression is the same as the Rancid progression in every way except that it's in minor. So if you're going for something that's a little darker, a little edgier, and if you want to sound exactly like Ballroom Blitz, because as soon as you hear it, that's pretty much at least it's all I can think of for sure. So if you use that progression, be aware that people will probably say that you stole it from Ballroom Blitz, but I've done it. I've stolen it from one of my songs, which you can check out my music at the link down below. I used it in a song called "We're Gonna Party Tonight," because I wanted to have that vibe.